Hey everybody, today just wanted to do a quick video and talk a little bit about XControls. So we'll talk a little bit about what they are, how you can create them, some of the, advantages, disadvantages that kind of come with these. So in an essence, I'll just start with the demo here. But in essence, what an XControl is it's a way, so here's our demo XControl, but it's a way to basically build in functionality or combine multiple controls into a single control. So for example, here in this XControl, you can see the bounds are kind of covering all of this. I have this color box here. I also have these three different RGB numeric controls, and I have a button. So all of these controls are able to be combined together into a single control, and I'm able to build functionality into this. So, and I can demo this, right? So if I, type in like an RGB value, so let's say, 160, it changes the color box, and I have it set so when this changes, it also updates this graph here. So I can add a value for B, add a value for G, right? And I add this button here that just generates a random color. So you can see it updates the color box, but it also updates the RGB values. And if we take a look at the code on this VI, all there is I have this event structure with a panel close event. So when I click that X in the corner, that stopped it. And then one other case that just is the XControl value change being written to the waveform chart. So you can see there's no other code in this VI. That's because all of the functionality, so all of the calculating RGB from color or color to RGB, the random color generation, all of that stuff, it's all cooked into the XControl itself. So yeah, that's one of the big advantages of XControls. You're able to build in custom functionality that is part of the control. So you're able to, use it in different projects without having to kind of rebuild that functionality every time, without having to, every, UI event handler having all of this different logic to do different things. You can kind of encapsulate that into the control. Now, one of the other big advantages is you are able to combine multiple controls. So this is helpful in a lot of different scenarios, right? You might have, let's say, a graph, and you want to add some custom tools to include with the graph, and you don't want to have to program that logic all the time. So maybe you want different behaviors, like as you mouse over a plot, it displays the value next to your cursor, stuff like that. You can build that into an XControl. Different analysis could be built in using different sliders, buttons, controls, whatever. So those are kind of the advantages. So let's look at how you can make an XControl. So I already obviously have one set up, but if you need to create a new one, all you need to do is, sorry, not on my project, go to new, and right down here you'll see XControl, and that's going to create an XControl, and it's going to look, or I can create one here. So you get an XControl. You also get these data, state, facade, and init. So these are all kind of come with it by default. So let's talk about what the different components are so you understand how to leverage an XControl. So first we have this data type def. So this is going to define the data type of your XControl. So like I said, there could be a lot of different controls of various types built into your XControl. It doesn't necessarily have to be the data type of all of those things though. So if you remember in our XControl demo, we were only outputting a color into the property of the graph to set it to the background to be a certain color. So that one, even though it had multiple numeric controls, a color box, and a button, it was of type color box. So here's, the demo I showed. There you can see its data type was that. So here you're just able to define what the data type of your XControl is. And like I said, it doesn't have to match all of the things that your XControl can do. Just this is what's going to be able to be wired in and out of it in a different VI on the block diagram. Close out of that. You also have this state type def. So by default, you get this cluster that has a numeric in it. And same thing, the data, the default is a numeric. If you want to change this, you just need to replace this with whatever the actual data type you want to use is. And same thing goes here. So state is different than data. So this is for including information that's not specifically the data of the XControl. So this usually is related to like the display state. Right, default, we have a numeric. I could change that, for example, to a color box like we did on our demo here. And that basically allows us to pass in, to be able to modify the display state behavior through different properties and methods. And we'll take a look at that. We then have this facade. And so this is kind of going to be the core of the XControl. So this is where most of the behavior is taking place, and where we're able to actually build in that custom logic. So you can see, you get some kind of notes in here where, here's where we're actually going to lay out what we want the XControl to look like. And then we want to resize this window to fit the contents, because when we drag the XControl, it's going to place the visible contents from this facade VI into the front panel of whatever other VI where you're using the XControl. Yeah, there's obviously other notes for, scaling and whatnot. So, yeah, here you'll basically just delete this note and then add whatever controls you want to make this up. And you'll open the block diagram and you get this just event loop, basically. And again, this is where all of the core functionality of your XControl is taking place. So you're going to have a few different inputs and outputs, and I'll talk about these. And obviously, you're right, you didn't see these on the front panel, and you don't have to worry about these showing up in your XControl. They're not going to be shown up in your XControl. So first we have data in and data out. So this is going to be defined by the data type you set. So if you notice, this is a type def. By default, it's a numeric. If we change it to a color box or a cluster or a graph or whatever it is we want, that's the data type we're going to get in and out. We also have that display state in. So this is that same type def we were looking at, the cluster of a numeric by default, where we are basically able to pass that in and out, and then we can act on that in here. We do have a container state as well. And so this has some additional information that you can use. So I'm going to just unbundle this real quick so you can see. So this is more informative for use inside of the actual XControl. So you're going to have this true false. Is this an indicator? So you can tell whether once it's been dropped onto the front panel somewhere, is it set as a control or indicator? And then you can basically build in logic based off of that, or maybe you only intend it to be used in a single way and you can prevent someone from changing that. Or yeah, if you want it to behave differently or appear differently between the two, you can do that. You also can see whether this is in run mode or edit mode. So yeah, that way you know whether you're able to make modifications, etc. And you get a reference to the actual XControl itself. So if you need to read some properties or something like that about the XControl, you can. And then you have one other cluster down here. So we're able to basically pass out actions, right? So whenever something in the calling VI of the XControl does something, right? So reads the value, writes the value, sets a property or a method or something, it's going to call this facade VI. And so, and one thing to note, right, this note up here, this isn't a continuously running VI. So this basically, once something happens, it triggers an event here and it calls this VI, and this VI will execute and then stop. So it's not something that's continuously running in the background and doing stuff. It only does something when it's told to do something. So, the action is our way of telling LabVIEW to update something, right? So we have this data change Boolean in here. So we can say, hey, the data has changed. So we want LabVIEW to redraw the XControl with this new value. We have state change. So here we're able to modify display state information as well when that changes. And we have an action name string we can use as well. And this comes with a few default cases, right? So there's this note on timeout. It should always be set to 0. We don't ever want this waiting. And again, that comes back to this is something that gets called when something needs to happen, and that's it. So we don't want it hanging up the rest of the application. We have this data change. So if in the calling VI, right, someone has changed the actual data, that's going to trigger this event. And then we can wire out whatever data we want. If we need to, we could also even modify display state. And then we just need to specify an action of what has changed. And I'm going to walk through the one I created in just a sec so you can actually see this kind of filled out some. Same thing, display state works the same way. So this means that the calling VI has tried to modify the display state of the XControl. So it calls the Facade VI with this case. And then we want to be able to execute whatever logic we need to here, and then output the display state, and we'll need to update the action that the state has changed. Direction change, so this is going to be whether the XControl has been switched from a control to an indicator or an indicator to a control. So that way we're notified and we can build in whatever logic specifically that we need. Hence why there's this indicator check already. So we can see, we know that the direction changed. Now we can see whether it was changed to be an indicator or a control. And execution state. So this is basically a way to check whether we've changed between edit mode and run mode. So let's go take a look at the example I've made already. So yeah, our data we already looked at. I have it set to color box. Our init. Oh, I forgot to talk about init. Sorry. So init is another VI that's going to kind of be with your XControl by default. So what this does is when your XControl is initialized, so that means either it's dropped onto a new front panel, or if a VI that has it on the front panel is loaded, it will then be initialized, which will basically call this VI. So here you're able to do a few different things. So you're able to look at versioning, right? So you can see if a previous version of your XControl was loaded, and if you need to do any specific behavior to modify that to the latest. You also can read the previous state, and then you can also set defaults for both values and display states. So you're able to modify some of that kind of startup behavior. And there is good notes here. But yeah, so initialize is there for basically controlling the startup behavior of your XControl. And if you don't want any specific startup behavior, you're fine to just leave it as is. So yeah, our init is there, and our state, we have a color box. So let's look at the facade. So here I have my XControl. So you can see I've placed all of these different controls. Whoops, did not mean to do that. Right here. And then if I open the block diagram, I've just added some logic in, right? So when we have a data change, right? So we looked at this in the previous XControl. The big difference is the data that was passed in. So on the user interface, the user has changed some data. I have just a I'm updating the color box to match that color with a local variable. And I'm updating this data changed cluster, or down here, to basically say, yes, the data's changed, so LabVIEW will know to update my XControl. So pretty simple. And then, so RGB, right? So I have these three different, this is obviously an event case that I created myself, but I added a val change for for all three of RG and B. So if any of them change, we're actually generating the color from the RGB, writing that to the color box, passing that new data out, and we also are letting it know that the data has changed. So you're able to create as many different event cases as you need for your XControl to define its behavior. Color box, obviously as well, if you change the color box, I want to calculate RGB, pass that out, and let you know that the data has changed. Also, if you click the random button, here I just want to generate 3 random numbers between 0 and 255. From that, get an RGB, update the RGB numerics, update the color box, and of course, let it know that data has changed and pass out the new data. Display state I actually am not using here, but if I wanted to modify display state behavior, I could. Direction change I'm not using. Execution state change I'm not using. So yeah, that's the basics, right? Like really not that complex, but I'm able to build in functionality so that when I use this in another VI, the other VI doesn't need all of this logic for, converting between colors or whatever it is that you're doing with the XControl. And so that's kind of the basics. One thing to note, if I open this XControl demo, you'll see this immediately changed its state to show that it's running, and the XControl over here shows that it's locked. So the thing being, this VI is now loaded, so the entire XControl becomes uneditable and locked while this is open. And when I close it out, this then becomes editable. So that's that difference between runtime, edit time that we were talking about, that you're able to pull inside of your Facade. So yeah, just one thing to be aware of. And then a couple last things I just wanted to show really quickly. If you go to your specific XControl and right click, you're actually able to define some additional behavior. So if you go to new, there is first this option for ability. So by default, we have predefined abilities, right? So we've already talked about data, we've already talked about state, we've talked about Facade, we've talked about init. Now there are also other options that you can add if you want. So for example, there's an uninit. So basically, when the XControl is removed from memory, it's going to run this uninit. Now if I need to deallocate something, so for example, in our init, let's say I allocated something to this XControl. So let's say I created a DVR, right? And then I'm using that, throughout my Facade or whatever it is, right? Now in my uninit, I decide I want to, destroy that reference. I'm able to do that like this. And same works if maybe you're using like a .NET, some different .NET framework, assemblies and stuff, and maybe in init you're kind of constructing those, and then you want to destroy the references in uninit, stuff like that. So you're able to add, there's 2 additional abilities, the uninit and the convert state for save. So this is going to have to do with, obviously saving. And then you also are able to add additional behavior. If you go to new, so you can add properties and methods. So and property and method is just referring to like your typical property nodes and invoke nodes, right? So you have both properties and you have methods for different controls. And these different controls have different default properties and methods. Here you're able to assign unique custom properties and methods that can be accessed through those same property nodes and invoke nodes. So if, for example, I have a graph and I want to have a method that generates an FFT of that graph data, well, I can just build that into it, and then it can easily just be called from an invoke node without having to drop down an FFT and whatever other processing you might want to build into it. So that's just one example. So you're able to create additional properties and methods. So let's say, I click a method. Method 1 now shows up here, where I can basically then define, and there's instructions here on how to set this up. And yeah, you get some notes here on how to define this. So here you can add then all your custom properties, methods to add additional behavior beyond what you might just want to include in your facade. So yeah, and that's kind of in a nutshell, XControls. Now, like I said, the kind of advantages there is you're able to build functionality into the control itself, where you don't need to define that in every UI. So if you have a lot of behavior that you reuse, and I think graphs is a really good example, right? Where the native LabVIEW graphs have a lot of functionality, but a lot of times we want to build additional functionality into those, and we want to be able to reuse that across different projects. Well, now it's cooked into the XControl itself. Just reusing the XControl allows you to then have that behavior wherever you want it. So that's one. And then two, having all of these multiple different controls that all interact with each other, cooked into a single control. Now there are caveats with XControls, so you're aware. So these XControls are what is called an X node, which inherently, well, not inherently, but have historically been known to cause strange behavior in terms of various LabVIEW errors, build issues, stuff like that. So it's, for the most part, they often work fine, but there are times where they have caused strange issues. So that's just one thing to be aware of, is that they can sometimes lead to issues, and they can sometimes cause abnormal behavior. So just one thing to be aware of. There is XControls that do exist. It's a toolkit that's available on VIPM that follows more of a object-oriented approach to adding behavior to different controls. So that is a good alternative that is known to be more reliable, but the structure of that is different than this. Patterned similarly, but different. So just so you're aware. But yeah, that's basically going to be the crash course on what XControls are, how you can create them, how you can use them, and kind of some of the pros and cons there. So I hope that was helpful.
Canon Controls is your gateway to mastering LabVIEW. Dive into programming for data acquisition, industrial communications, and manufacturing automation. Explore how to enhance your projects with cybersecurity best practices. Join the journey to elevate your skills and secure your systems with every episode.